A ham and a half. I used to wonder where that little piece of bologna went to. I thought that Mama must have ate it, and as far as I was concerned, she had it coming. Every slice of fried bologna would wind up with a piece out of it that was shaped like a piece of pie. That was caused by the frying of the slice of bologna. Now, if you just fried a slice of bologna, then it would shrivel up and pucker up because the grease is fried out of all the fat meat that they put in the bologna. Now, to keep a piece of bologna from looking like a little meat bowl, she would cut it from the middle to the edge, and then when she would fry it, the slice of bologna would shrink up and look like a little pie with a piece missing. But I didn't think that she would steal food from the rest of us, even if it was just a piece of bologna. She always had the least on her plate when she helped us to the food at supper time. Daddy would have the most, and I would have the next most because I was the oldest boy. Now, Peg got the next most because she was a girl, and even if she was older than me. And Shade and Mousy got the next most, and Maisie got the least most because she was the littlest and a girl. To tell you the truth, to this day, I got no use whatsoever for fried bologna and tomato gravy. I hate them. Seems to me like darn near every year that's all we would have for Thanksgiving. And maybe some biscuits to pour the tomato gravy over top of. Biscuits were better than sliced bread. Even if the biscuits were too hard, the tomato gravy would soften them up if you could stand to wait long enough before you started to eat. Now, the reason that I stopped liking fried bologna and tomato gravy was because I found that everybody else in the world had turkey for Thanksgiving. I found this out when I started reading Real Good come the middle of September. The reason that I stopped liking fried bologna and tomato gravy was because I found that everybody else in the world had turkey for Thanksgiving. I found this out when I started reading Real Good. Now, come the middle of November, all the funny paper stories would talk about the turkey and whether he's going to get his head chopped off. And the boys and girls at school would all talk about turkey for Thanksgiving supper and all the stuff that goes with it. And we would go and have fried bologna and tomato gravy. Now, it is really a lie to say that I hate fried bologna and tomato gravy. I really love it. I love any food. But I hated the thought that while the million other people in the world were eating turkey for Thanksgiving, I was eating fried bologna and tomato gravy and maybe biscuits. Now, I had seen a poster up in the store that said, "Turkey shoot, 50 cents a shot." A turkey shoot is not exactly what it sounds like. I thought you would shoot a turkey, but that is not so. It said that you would win a free turkey if you won. And I don't know what a turkey shoot was at that time, but I knew what a turkey was, and I was all set to have turkey for Thanksgiving supper because I had seen those advertisements in the Richmond News Leader with pictures of cooked turkeys with little white booties on the feet and some steam rising up off it. I would look at that picture and smell that turkey plain as day. I had never seen a real wild turkey, but I could hear them down in the woods making that noise that they make. And whenever I would hear it, I would try to make Daddy go down in the woods and shoot one. But he would always say something like, "Oh, I don't know no more about hunting than a cat knows about a holiday." I thought he ought to try, but he wouldn't. "You so ready to shoot something, just wait till you big enough to take the kick from that 12 gauge. He was right. The 12 gauge kicked like a mule. Anytime you think you're ready to shoot it, let me know and I'll show you how. Just, you gotta buy a shell. I ain't wasting my shell on a boy." He would shoot it straight up in the air every 4th of July and New Year's Eve when he didn't have money to buy some firecrackers. I guess he figured that shooting straight up in the air was not wasting a shotgun shell. One time it blacked his right eye, and another time it gave him a bloody nose. So I was scared to shoot that 12 gauge until I got bigger. But every time I would see geese flying north, I would think ahead to the time that I could shoot one of them down with a 12 gauge. I imagined that a goose would taste a whole lot like a turkey. Maybe I'd shoot 2 of them. That would be enough to feed us all for more than a week. The turkey shoot was on Thanksgiving morning at 7 o'clock. It cost 50 cents for every time you shot. The poster said that there would be live turkeys for sale there if you didn't win one. It surprised me when Daddy said that he would go to it. He was going to be at Presley's farm, which was almost all the way down to King William County, so I didn't know much about it. Most of what I know about places in Hanover County, I know from riding the school bus. But school bus number 10 didn't go that way. I asked Daddy if I could go too, because I had never seen a turkey shoot, and I had never been farther down the Tappahannock Highway than the turn to my cousin Emmett's farm, when he would sometimes put me to work dropping tomato plants or shelling corn. But Daddy said no, and I knew he would. A boy your size ain't got no business at a turkey shoot. Somebody shoot you, then what happens? I ain't got no money either to take you to the doctor or to pay old man Woody to bury you. I thought it would be all right for me to be there because they would probably shoot. I thought it would be all right for me to be there because they would probably rather shoot a turkey than a little boy. So I said, getting real loud, "Now, Jernin, I want to go. I don't ever get to go nowhere." Then Daddy give me that look with his eyes all squinched up and his mouth closed down hard so the line between his lips was as straight as an arrow. When he put that look on his face, I knew that one more word out of me would get my lips swelled up, so I shut up. "What in the hell's the matter with you, boy? You afraid somebody gonna fart and you ain't gonna smell it?" Daddy had moved a house down that way. I remember him telling me all about it. Many's the time he would tell me about what's happening at work that day, when he was feeling right and he wasn't too tired. And he would tell stories about the men on the job. He would tell stories of the good ones like they were heroes, and funny stories of the stupid things that was done by the bad ones. I never saw most of them, but all he had to do was call out a name, and like an explosion, the face of the one he named would be in my mind just as clear as if he was standing in front of me. Eddie Wingfield, blam, and there he was. Lucas Martin, blam, and there he was. Ben Tyler, blam, there he was. Of course, it was all up in my head. If I ever got really to see one of them, they wouldn't look anything like what I thought they would. Daddy told most of the hero stories about Lee, his best friend on the job. I figured he was white, but he wasn't. I remember Daddy telling about working on that job at Presley's farm. To hear him tell it, it was one of the biggest places he'd ever seen. He said it looked like an old-fashioned plantation. I remember Daddy telling about working on that job at Presley's farm. To hear him tell it, it was one of the biggest places he had ever seen. He said it looked like an old-fashioned plantation. They grew all the truck crops, plus they kept laying hens, eating chickens, pigs, cows, mules, oats, wheat, barley, and even some of that new crop from Japan that they called soldier beans. Now, they butchered their pigs themselves and had the biggest smokehouse in the world, all full of Smithfield hams and shoulders, ham hocks, bacon, and any other part of a pig that you can imagine. Daddy talked about that smokehouse the way I would talk about Santa Claus's workshop at the North Pole. Now, I heard him tell Robert Pruitt up at the store, that he would rather have 5 minutes in that smokehouse than an hour with Veronica Lake. Daddy always kept just one shell in the 12 gauge. He said he couldn't afford to buy more than one at a time. And whenever he would shoot the gun, he would go and buy another shotgun shell and load it in the barrel. One time I asked him what he would do if 2 crooks came into the house to rob us. And he said, I would make them sons of bitches dance together, and then I could kill them both with the same shell. Now the 12 gauge hung on 2 nails high up on the wall, so high that I had to stand on a chair if I wanted to touch it. Now Daddy kept a corn cob pushed in behind the trigger so that you couldn't pull it without getting rid of the corn cob. Now his daddy, my granddaddy, had given him that gun for his 12th birthday back in 1913, back in the old-timey days before they knew how to put a safety latch on 12 gauges. On Thanksgiving morning, Daddy took it down and took out the shell and put it in his pocket. Now, the shell was yellow. Now, most of the shotgun shells I ever saw were red, and I like the red ones the best. Well, he pulled out the corn cob from behind the trigger and he handed it to me. Save this for me, man. If you lose it, I'll take away your nickel a day until I have enough to buy a new one. The thought of me not getting my nickel a day to go to school with made me start to get tears in my eyes, and I was fixing to cry. But then Daddy bust out laughing, and I figured out the joke. Hanover County won't nothing but one big corn cob place. Everywhere you looked, there was a corn cob. In every field, beside the road, in the wood box, everywhere. Well, he gave me a little wink and laughed, and then he slammed that corn cob back behind the trigger again. And I laughed too. Our driveway come in off Creighton Road about 2 football fields from our house, because where our house was on a bank 10 or 15 high. Our driveway come in off Creighton Road about 2 football fields from our house, because where our house was on the bank 10 or 15 foot higher than the road. Now there was a red clay bank there that you could slide down or climb up, but it was too steep for a car or a truck. So you had to drive down the edge of the field right next to Creighton Road to where the road rose up to the field. Daddy climbed up in Black Lady, the black 39 Ford 2-ton truck, and hit the starter. It sneezed a couple of times and quit. I don't know why he even bothered with that starter button. It never started until he let it roll down the hill. And Daddy climbed up into Black Lady, the black 39 Ford 2-ton truck, and hit the starter. It sneezed a couple of times and quit. I don't know why he even bothered with that starter button. It never started unless he let her roll down that little rise in the yard and then that he parked on. He jumped the clutch and she backfired once or twice and took off down the lane. Now one time, Daddy was playing a really funny joke on Mama. He told her that he found a house to move in with running water and electric lights, but he didn't rent it because it didn't have no hill to roll down. Mama bust out crying like a baby, worse than a baby, doing that holler crying that she used to scare me so bad when I was little. I couldn't see what she was crying about. It was just a joke. Daddy always had all kinds of jokes. They always made me laugh. Daddy was always funny. He could make me laugh even when I was crying from a beating he gave me. I had walked outside with Daddy in hopes that he would change his mind in the last minute and let me ride with him. But like I knew he wouldn't, he didn't. He never changed his mind in his whole life. I decided to stay outside for a while. If I went back inside, Mama would just put me to work doing something, and I thought that Thanksgiving was the kind of day where you could just stand around and not work unless somebody paid you for it. It took a couple of minutes for the truck to get out to Creighton Road. Then I heard the truck coming back down Creighton Road toward me. He should have turned left to get over to Tappahannock Highway, but here he comes, right on by me, down below my feet. And then, not more than 2 minutes later, here he comes the other way, and I see Eddie Wingfield is in the truck with him. And that's why he wouldn't let me go. Him and Eddie Wingfield had planned all this out. It didn't take him but 2 minutes to go to Eddie Wingfield's house and pass me by again, so Eddie Wingfield must have had his clothes and his shoes and all ready to go. It didn't look right to me. Why in the world would he take Eddie Wingfield with him to a turkey shoot? What good would he be? You know that they won't be letting a colored boy shoot with a white man. That wouldn't be right. Besides, nobody wants to see a colored boy with a gun in his hands. And when Daddy was working on that job down at Presley's farm, Eddie Wingfield rode to work with him in Black Lady. Eddie Wingfield was a pretty good old darky. He had a lot of children, and he was polite. He was ignorant, pretty much like the rest of them. He was all the time bringing letters and pieces of paper for Daddy to read to him. And Eddie Wingfield would walk the 3/4 of a mile from his shack to our shack. And Daddy kept offering to pick him up at his house, but Eddie Wingfield would always say, "Much obliged, Mr. Percy, but I don't want to put you out." After work, whether it was raining or not, Daddy would carry Eddie Wingfield just as far as our place. And he would always climb out of the truck and offer Daddy a dime and say, "Here, 10 cents for the ride, Mr. Percy." Always the same way. "Here, 10 cents for the ride, Mr. Percy." Daddy would just make a joke and say, "Save that dime and buy groceries with it." Or "Winter time's coming, buy a hat for your head." Or "You can get a $5 bill in the Confederate money with that dime. Save up your Confederate money, son, because the South's going to rise again." And Eddie Wingfield would always do that falling down laugh at the one about the Confederate money and say, "You sure is a card, Mr. Percy. You sure, Lord, is a card." And he would walk on home whether it was raining or not. Now, the job at the Presley farm lasted several weeks. And Daddy told me how old man Presley had all the tenant shacks moved closer together so he would have space to build a new hog pen. Now, Eddie Wingfield had done some talking to the field hands who lived in the tenant shacks, and they had told him that old man Presley would run them off after they had got all the corn and soldier beans in. Some of them would go over to town and live for the winter, and the rest of them would go somewhere else. They couldn't stay on the place unless they had work to do. A colored fella showed Eddie Wingfield how to get inside the smokehouse without opening the padlock on the door. Now, I started to tell Mama that something funny was going on, but what's the use? She is so ignorant. She never tries to figure things out. Whatever you tell her, she believes. Then somebody else comes along and tells her the opposite, and she believes that too, without believing the first one was a liar. She should have never left Caroline County. You might do like that up there, but you can't get away with it in Hanover County. It's a good thing she's got Daddy to look after her. And she told me that if you had a long enough stick, you could poke a hole in the sky and make it rain. And I don't think there's even one darky in the whole world who believes that. Mama had already got the makings for fried bologna and tomato gravy for Thanksgiving supper, but she put the bologna in the back of the icebox and the 2 cans of tomatoes up on the high shelf. Yo, Daddy is going to bring us a turkey for supper because can't nobody shoot like he can. She would always say stuff like that about him. He's the only white man in the world who can whip Joe Louis if they got in a fight. She told about how she saw him pick up a T-model Ford and put it on top of a fire hydrant, and how he toted an electric icebox up the stairs by himself. Now, I used to believe all that stuff, but by the time you get to be 11 years old, you start to think twice about some of this stuff. And Daddy is a smart man and a strong man, which I've seen for myself. He can do the crossword puzzle in the news leader and fill in every box. But now that I've got this old, I know I don't have to believe everything I hear and only about half of what I see. When I was 7, I figured it out about Santa Claus, that there wasn't no such thing as him, and went and told Peg about it. And even though she was 9, she hadn't figured it out yet until I told her. The one thing I do believe is that my grandmama could make a table walk. Now, she died before I was born, but Daddy told me all about it. Everybody saw her do it at least once. Daddy saw her do it a whole lot of times. Every time a bunch of Burtons got together, it wouldn't be too long before they were all trying to make liars out of one another on Grandmama making a table walk stories. She would always do it after she'd been talking to her brother, who had died before she did, and whose name was Bam. Now, I think Bam was a nickname of one sort or another. They said that she would go doze off to sleep, and presently you could hear Bam walking down the alley next to her house to get to his room up over a horse stall in the back. You could tell it was Bam's walk because he had been born with a crippled up foot, and he made a clippity-clop sound when he walked. Now just remember, Bam was already dead. Still, you could hear him clippity-clopping down the alley. The next thing you know, Grandmama would start mumbling. She would say, "How you feeling?" And then she would say, "I'm feeling right good." And she would carry on like that for a while. All the time, she's sleeping. The only thing is, she was talking back and forth to her brother Bam with that no-count foot. Half the time, it was the voice of Bam coming out of her mouth, and the other time it was her voice. It looks like dead people don't have anything more to say than the other half. It would go along like that for a few minutes, and then Bam's voice would say, "Oh, I'm right busy right now. My greetings to all. Now, do what I learned you to do." And then she would stand straight up and walk over to the table and put her hands flat down on it, and it would commence walking. Now, Daddy told me this thing almost 1,000,000 times, but it won't just him. Every Burton and everybody else in the world who had ever seen Grandmama had seen her do it, and were all too glad to tell me about it. The best one was when Unc Perk got drunk and said he was going to show that Grandmama was a fake, even though she was his sister-in-law. The table started up the steps and threw him off and broke his leg. Now, I know all this is true because Unc Perk still has a little limp on that side. Daddy had to tell me this because it happened way back before I was born. Now, a turkey shoot works this way, so they tell me. Now, everybody in Hanover County knows everything there is to know about turkey shoots, but I have never been to one. I hate it when the boys in my grade are talking about turkey shoots and I don't have nothing to say. But I've heard enough talk about it that I know pretty much everything that goes on at a turkey shoot, or at least enough to tell somebody all that they need to know. Now, they have a bunch of fence posts set up in a line from your left to your right. I never heard it mentioned how many, but I guess it's about 10. Now, they nail targets on these posts, and if they have more shooters than fence posts, then they might put 2 targets on one fence post, one high and one low. Then all the shooters line up left or right, looking in the direction of the targets 50 steps away from, and they all shoot at the same time. I bet that's pretty loud. They're supposed to use number 9 shot, but some cheaters use bird shot to win. But if they get caught, they have to give the turkey back. Now, you hear about some of them taking off the end of the shell and dumping all the number 9 shot out and putting in the bird shot. I think it would be better if people just decided not to do any cheating. The targets look about the size of a piece of notebook paper with a bullseye drawn on it. And everybody shoots at a new piece of paper every time. And after they shoot a few shots, then they count up how many pieces of shot went through the bullseye, and the one with the most holes wins the turkey. I would be worried that 2 of my shots would go through the same hole. Then I'd get cheated. Well, it didn't take long. They were back before I even got used to them being gone. No more than 2.5 hours. Maybe it seemed so short because I was used to seeing Daddy go off to work at 6:30 in the morning and then not seeing him till he comes home at night. I just happened to be sitting in the Johnny house when they got back, Daddy and Eddie Wingfield. Now, the Johnny house has cracks between the boards where you can see out without anybody seeing in unless they stuck their eye right up against the crack. I could see them, but they couldn't see me. Now, Eddie Wingfield was sitting in the truck when Daddy drove up in the yard, sitting right next to Daddy. It looked funny to see a colored boy sitting in a seat beside a white man, but what could you do? It was a truck and it didn't have a back seat. And on Thanksgiving Day, it was too cold to tell Eddie Wingfield to sit in the back of the truck. Daddy always was soft-hearted, sometimes. Daddy didn't stop where he usually parks the truck at. Instead, he pulled a little farther on up the hill near the wood pile, turned it around, got out, and cut it off, and left it on the hill where he could get it started the next morning. Now, they climbed down out of the truck and went around to the back and pulled out what looked like, to me, 3 nasty, mossy chunks of wood. And I really thought that it was wood when Daddy commenced chopping one of them with an axe. And 3-4 licks, he had chopped it half in 2. It looked to me like it must have been cedar wood he was chopping because the inside was red. I'd never seen a cedar tree that big around. Now, Daddy picked up the biggest half and handed it to Eddie Wingfield, and then Eddie Wingfield picked up one of the other chunks and hit out for home. And Daddy picked up his hunk and a half and went on into the house. I made toilet paper with a few pieces of the Richmond News Leader and then followed Daddy on in the house. And when I got inside, Shade and Mousy were doing something on the floor, and Peggy was reading a Hollywood magazine. And Daddy was talking loud like he was mad. God damn it, Belle, I didn't win a goddamn turkey. I won a goddamn ham and a half. He looked at me. Yeah, boy, this stuff ain't fit today. He looked at me. Oh, here, boy, this stuff ain't fit to eat today. It's too salty. Put 'em in the spillway of the spring box and let them soak a while. We'll eat them Saturday. And make sure you tie them down so a goddamn coon don't drag 'em off. He handed me the 2 chunks of what I thought was cedar wood, but they were ham. The meat was red, which I thought looked like cedar. And the whole ham looked worse. It looked rotten. It was all black and brown and green moss all over it. I know that I would eat it on Saturday, but I was not going to be happy about it. The last time I ate the rabbit that Daddy had found run over in the road, I ate it, but I puked like crazy fool right after I did. I've got to eat what they feed me, even if it makes me sick. Well, I picked them up and started outside. And bring that 12-gauge shotgun back in here. It's in Black Lady's cab. A coon might steal that too. Daddy never missed a joke. Some of the mess and grease from the hams got all over my shirt because I had to carry them up in my arms like I was toting stove wood. It didn't show too much because I'd been wearing the shirt since Monday, and now it was Thursday, and I only had to wear it till Sunday, and then on Monday I could put on the other one. A shirt has to get pretty dirty before Mama would let me change, before Monday morning came around. Daddy told me to tie the ham and a half down, but he didn't tell me where to find a piece of string. Now I could have took down the clothesline and used that, but the knots were too hard to undo, so I looked around for something else to use. Now I can remember when we were not poor. Back then, I did not have to worry about not having a piece of string to tie down a ham with. Now, 2 things I noticed about being poor is that You never have a full belly, and you never can find a piece of string when you need it. And lucky for me, I almost stumbled over the pile of copper wire and pieces of copper pipe that Daddy had saved all year long to sell to the junkyard to buy Santa Claus for us every year. I found a piece of electric wire with the insulation still on it, which was longer than I was tall. I took it all down to the hill to the spring and tied all that meat down to a willow root that was growing in the stream and tried to cover it all up with some fallen logs and sticks. I did it just because I was afraid that Daddy would check up on me. I knew good and well if a coon or a possum or a dog wanted that meat, there was anything I could do to stop it. Coons know a lot more about being coons than I know. I done what he said and climbed back up that old clay bank from the spring and went to get the gun. It was on the floor right in the front seat. I pulled it out and snapped it open to take the shell out. A shotgun shell that had already been shot could be made into a whistle, and I knew how to make a whistle. But there was no shell in the barrel, shot or unshot. I sniffed down in there, but I didn't smell nothing. It looked to me like this gun had not been shot since July the 4th, and the corn cob was still behind the trigger. The unshot shotgun shell was sitting on the seat of the truck, right where Daddy was sitting. It had come out of his pocket, and it was yellow, the same color the shell that I had seen him put in his pocket before he left. And I figured it out. People around here talk about white trash like us being no count. I always thought they were wrong, but they're right. Daddy is a thief, and on Saturday I will eat some of the smoked ham he stole. I carried the gun on into the house and gave it to Daddy to hang up. It was too high for me to reach. Mama was opening up a jar of tomatoes to make the tomato gravy. She'd already made cuts into the slices of bologna that would keep it from curling up. I was getting real hungry. Fried bologna and tomato gravy are good enough for me.